I was getting a vibration coming from my front drivetrain over 65 miles an hour, and get the light up in there. I found that this flange right here, if I pry up on it with a pry tool, if I can get the pry tool in there, look at all that movement, if I can hold that thing still. So what that means is there's a bearing right inside here. That bearing's bad, giving me all that movement. So I'm going to replace that thing. I'm going to start by breaking loose these. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Looks like 6 flange bolts, and I'm going to do that by leaving the tire on the ground, and that's a 17 mil, and yeah, I'm going to break those. There's a patch of red Loctite on those. Those are tight. Alright, I need to get this axle shaft here over to the side out of the way, but this sway bar extension is in the way. Oh, it's a 9/16 bolt, and I can see that my bushings in there are shot. Too bad I don't have those bushings laying around to replace, because those are really the source of my death wobble that I'm getting. Again, if you're a man and you got a lifted vehicle, you're going to have this spacer right here. I didn't scribe any alignment indexes. Don't think it should be important at all. That's my Harbor Freight slide hammer. I bought it just for this job. I wasn't sure what all would be in it, but this flange tool right here should fit just perfect. I thought I was going to have to make a tool in order for this to work, but I think this should work just fine. Elevated the front end, got the wheel off the ground, and I'm going to have to turn the steering knuckle out of the way, so I'm going to have to break loose this outer tie rod fastener. I'm going to have to get this steering knuckle a little bit better out of the way. So I'm going to start by removing this brake line mount fastener, 10 mil. I'm going to try just taking this top ball joint nut off, and I've replaced this ball joint, so now it has a castellated nut and a cotter pin. Before you drop the steering knuckle, you should take all the preload off the tensioner. Just count how many turns you go. Boy. So I wasn't thinking about that not being supported. So you might want to throw a jack under there before you do that if you're dumb like me. But I got the adapter, that flange adapter on there, and you want those fasteners good and tight, because you are going to be yanking real hard on those threads. Oh yeah, I mean that was just way too easy. Should not have been that easy. I'm going to remove this seal. Got a little seal tool. Don't know if I can get in there or not. Find out. Oh goodness, that thing's in there. There it goes. Oh god. Alright, so I hate that I'm a walking, breathing advertisement for Harbor Freight, but this is my Harbor Freight blind hole bearing puller. So not quite as nice as the Kent Moore version. You put this down in your bore, spread this thing out, and see it's flaring out the backside of that. It'll bite onto the backside of that bearing, then you thread a slide hammer onto this side, slide that thing right on out of there. Time to hammer this thing out. Whenever you're doing this, you want to hold the tool straight, don't let it sag down, because you don't want that bearing to start to get sideways. You also don't want to take a chance of getting the tool sideways and gouging out the bore or the bearing seats. What do you do when you get home and realize that your Harbor Freight blind hole bearing puller only expands to 1 1/4 inch and your bearing is 1.67 or whatever it is inches? So there's like 0.4 inches more that this thing needed to expand. And first I tried cutting off the back of the tool, thinking I could thread this shaft in further and get this expanding collet to open up more. That didn't work, so I took the redneck approach and I welded up some. This used to not have this lip right here. I welded some extra material on here and changed the profile of this thing so that it expanded out more. It didn't work very well. As you can see, the tool steel, even though this is cheap Chinese tool steel, it was still hard enough to totally gall up the weld. But it worked, it got the job done. So instead of doing what I did, why don't you order the right blind hole bearing puller? You can order them off Amazon or wherever. There's you don't want these little, what is this, 5-piece or whatever kit. You want the big one, and it will specify that it goes to larger than 1.5 inches, or it's probably in metric size. So I think that's like 43 millimeters or whatever it is. I'm going to use this bearing driver to drive this bearing in. You could use a socket, that would work, but this bearing driver will just help make sure that everything stays a little bit straighter. And I've got it, so I might as well use it. So check this out. This is the old bearing. It has a the inner needles. The needles in here, well, you can see how worn they are. I don't know if that's showing up in the video or not. Over on the side that this finger's on, you can see a lip where the bearings have worn down. Anyway, they have this little castellated collar thing in here that keeps all these bearings and these needles in place. The new bearing doesn't have that. It just has bearings all the way around. So that means you have, I don't know, probably 60 or 70% more bearing material to ride on there. It's a good deal. Most bearings are press in, and it's a press fitment. It's an interference fitment. Instead of using a press, though, can't get a press down here, swing press. As you're doing this, since you're hammering it, you want to check it and make sure it's going in straight. If it's not, you need to adjust accordingly. The reason I make these videos is so I can make the mistakes so you don't have to. This bearing is supposed to sit flush with this shoulder right here. If you drive it in further, then you're going to have to pull it back out, which is what I just did. I was worried about tearing up the bearing, trying to pull it back out with that stupid little cheesy redneck puller that I made. But I didn't push it very far past flush, so I didn't have to pull it back out very far. So I don't think I damaged the bearing at all. I made sure everything was lined up real good. So anyway, only go to flush. Don't be dumb like me. This seal, I lube the outside with gear oil, same oil that goes in the diff. And I'm going to get this thing started with my dead blow. But it has a raised lip right here in the middle, so after I get it started, then I'm going to switch to a socket and drive it in the rest of the way with a socket that clears that lip. So this little snap ring right here is supposed to be the retaining ring that keeps the axle shaft from sliding out. Kind of pointless to have that because everything's bolted up into place, but kind of a cheesy setup. So twist that thing as you're driving it in just to make sure the splines are lining up correctly and you're not hammering away against the splines. And then you'll feel it when it gets home. It'll just stop and you won't be able to drive it any further. If you look in a GM service manual, I'm guessing they'll probably tell you not to reuse these 6 flange fasteners. I'm going to reuse them. I cleaned all the corrosion up and then put red Loctite on them. Reconnect the steering knuckle to the tie rod. And once I do that, I can untie the top of the steering knuckle and get the top ball joint lined back up. Alright, I jacked up the lower control arm, got the spindle lined up, or I'm sorry, I got the steering knuckle lined up with the ball joint, got that on there, got the nut started. Now I'm going to break this loose so I can turn. There we go. I'll be able to turn the steering knuckle and torque this top ball joint to 37 foot-pounds. and then I'll torque it a little more so I can line up the castellated nut and get the cotter pin in. Brake line retainer, 10 mil. Now the steering knuckle to outer tie rod fastener. By the way, if you can do this with your tie rod, it needs to be replaced. So I need to replace that. Reconnect the sway bar on both. With the front end unloaded and the weight off the control arm, crank up the torsion fastener back as many turns as you loosened it. Reinstall your tire, torque your lug nuts, and you're done.